Welcome to the section on loops. In this section, I'm going to teach you all of the major loops first, and then I'm going to give you some challenges and you can decide what loop might fit the scenario best. So for this video, the first loop that I'm going to teach you is your for loop. So let's go ahead and hop into Unity. So I'm going to right click and create a C# script, and I'm just going to call this one like all the loops. And then go ahead and double click and open it up. Okay, so the very first loop that you're learning, right, is called a for loop. Let's say in start, imagine that you had a message like debug.log, you're amazing, and say you wanted to print this out 50 times. The way that you currently know how to do that is you copy it and you'd paste it 50 times over, and that's super inefficient, right? What if you wanted to print it 50,000 times? You would want to use a loop. The way this for loop works is you write out for and then you open up parentheses and curly brackets. Now, inside the parentheses for this loop, we're defining the condition for how long we want this loop to run. We create what's called an index variable, and it's typically an integer, and the standard is I. So you would say for int I equals 0 with a semicolon inside. And like I said, you can call this whatever you want. You could call it Anna, you could call it cool beans, like it can be literally anything, but the industry standard is I. We're starting at 0. So for int I equals 0, and then what you say is I is less than some max value, whatever the maximum number of times that you want this to run is. So for us, I'm going to say 50 and then semicolon again. And then lastly, we need to iterate through, meaning that we need to increment our I up. So I plus plus. So what this is doing is it's starting at 0 and it's incrementing up I plus plus, which means it's then at 1. So it's going to print it one time. And then it's checking again. So I is now 1. Is I less than 50? Yeah, 1 is less than 50. So it's going to increment again and print the message again. And it's going to go all the way through until this 50, that max condition is reached. And then at the bottom, we can also put a debug.log to let you know like loop is done now. So let's save the script, hop into Unity, and I'll show you how this works. Oh yeah, make sure that your script is attached to a game object and let's hit play. And on the console, you are amazing printed out 50 times, and the loop is done now has printed out once. So that's the basic declaration of a for loop that's counting up. I'm going to show you what if we wanted it to count down instead. So we're opening up a for loop, we're opening up brackets, and let's say we want it to count down from 100. So I'm going to say int I equals 100, right? We're starting at 100. And the condition for the loop to run is as long as I is greater than 0. Since we're counting down. 0 is our exit condition, and then we need to go I minus minus, meaning that we are counting down. And to show you that it's doing that, what we can do is that we can say debug.log I, and that's going to print out this index variable. And like I said, we could even right click and rename it, and I'm going to call it like timer, right? So our timer is 100. As long as it's greater than 0, it's going to count down, and we're going to print out the timer. So let's save our script, and I'll show you what counting down looks like. All right, so on our console at the very top, now we have 100 messages starting from 100, 99, 98, 97, all the way down until we get to 1. Since it's not going to include 0, our exit loop was if it's greater than 0, so it ended at 1. Okay, so that's how to get a loop to count down. So instead of printing out every single number from 100 down to 1, what if we only wanted to print out the even numbers, right? How do we know if a number is even? We know that if we divide that number by 2 and there's no remainder, that's an even number, right? So what we can do inside this for loop is we could wrap this debug.log in an if, and we could check if there's a remainder. So what we could check is we could check if there's a remainder. What we are checking for, right, is if timer divided by 2, if the remainder equals 0. And there's actually an operator for that called the modulus operator. So instead of just dividing by 2, we're going to use the percentage sign. And that's going to say, hey, divide it by 2 and check how much is left over. And if that leftover amount equals 0, this thing is true. So let's go ahead and save the script, and you'll see that it's going to print out only the even numbers all the way down. Okay, and in our console, we're starting at 100, 98, 96, 94, and it's just the even numbers all the way down until 2. What if we wanted to print out only the odd numbers? Well, that's pretty simple too. If it's an odd number, you know that there will be a remainder, so instead of checking if the modulus of our timer divided by 2 is 0, we're just checking if the remainder is 1. And if we save that, it'll print out all of the odd numbers instead. And there you go, it's starting at 99, 97, 95, all the way down until 1, skipping all of the even numbers and printing out only the odd. Perfect. Not everything in game design is math intensive. Often there's a bunch of little calculations that you'll be doing, and the modulus operator can come in handy for that. Oftentimes you'll see the modulus operator in like RPGs if you're calculating the modifiers on like a player's stat or something. The second to last thing that I want to show you on this is how to print out a specific index. So let's say on the timer that if it equals 37, that we want to print out something special when it equals 37. So we would just check if our timer equals 37, and then we would just print out debug.log. The timer is at 37. And imagine for a second that maybe this isn't a timer. So maybe let's actually rename this just to imagine. Imagine that this is an item ID, like you're iterating through a shop, right? And when you get to item 37, then you want to print out information about that. Found item 37. All right, let's hit save. And there we go at the bottom. Found item 37 printed out once. The last thing that I want to show you with this is how to break out of a loop early. You already know the keyword break from our last section on switch statements, and it's exactly the same keyword here. Let's use this example. We're counting down through all of our item IDs, and we could imagine that there's like 100,000 items that we are filtering through. But when we get to item 37, does it make sense for our loop to keep running if item 37 is the one we're looking for? No, it makes sense for us to stop the loop there and say, okay, we're done. We found item 37. And it's as simple as just saying break. And to show you that that works, I'm going to also put a debug.log item ID so that you can see that it's going to print all the way up until 3637, and then it'll stop printing. Let's hit save. And in our console, we done up somehow, huh? Oh, because it was a counting down loop. So it did count down from 10,000 all the way until it got to 37. And then it stopped at 37 and stopped counting down. Whoops, that's my bad. I meant to make it go the other way, but that does go to show you that that's how you break out of a loop. And you might be asking yourself, when am I ever going to use a for loop in a game? And the answer is kind of a lot. Like, imagine that you're playing a fighting game and you have one of those ground pound attacks that deals damage in a blast radius. Well, you can use a for loop to iterate through all of the enemies that are within your blast radius and deal the appropriate damage to them. Imagine that you have like a window you're going to break or a crate you're going to break. Believe it or not, you'd probably use a for loop to iterate through all of those pieces that make up the window or the crate or whatever you're destroying and apply the appropriate force to make it look like an explosion happened. You might also use a for loop when you like add an item to a player's inventory, like in Minecraft or something. You would loop through all the items in their inventory to check if they already had it, and if they do, add it to the existing item slot, and if they don't, create a new slot for it. For loops come in handy all the time. And loops work really well with a thing called coroutines, which we're going to get into in a future section, but this wraps up the basics of what a for loop is. So in the next video, I'm actually going to give you a challenge real quick just so you can get a little bit of practice working with a for loop, and then I'll introduce some other new loops to you. Okay, see you in the next one.